My name is Daniel. I am 27 years old, and the memory of one birthday still burns like fire in my chest. Imagine saving for months, working overtime, finally buying yourself something that feels like a reward for all the years of being overlooked. That night, I carried the sleek box inside my car like it was a treasure. I had promised myself I would open it later in the quiet of my apartment, away from judgmental eyes. But fate was cruel. When I walked into my parents' house for what was supposed to be a modest birthday dinner, I never expected the ambush waiting for me. My father, with a forced smile, announced they had a surprise. For one fleeting second, I thought maybe they had finally noticed me, finally cared. My mother held a wrap box the exact size and shape of the tablet in my car. My chest pounded with hope. Could they really have remembered? But no. With casual cruelty, she set the package in front of my younger sister, Lauren. My confusion slipped into horror as she tore into the paper and revealed exactly what I had purchased for myself. I froze, choking on disbelief. My father waved me off like I was a child making a fuss. "You didn't deserve anything this year, Daniel. Lauren needs it more. She has potential." The words cut deeper than any blade. The message was clear. My hard work, my sacrifices, my existence, it all weighed less than my sister's convenience. Lauren didn't even look at me. She smiled, gushing about how much better it was than the ones in her college lab. They had stolen from me without shame, then declared I was unworthy. I wanted to scream, to flip the table, to demand an explanation. But instead, something inside me shifted. Years of swallowed disappointment and silent tears hardened into resolve. I stood up, walked toward the door, and ignored their voices calling after me. I remember gripping the doorknob, looking back one last time. My father's irritation, my mother's obliviousness, Lauren's smugness. I left without a word. Driving away that night, tears blurred the streets I had known since childhood. By the time I reached my small apartment, the tears had dried. A strange calm washed over me, cold but steady. I knew then that there would be no going back. This wasn't just about a stolen gift. It was about decades of being invisible, of being told I was less of giving while receiving nothing. That night I blocked their numbers, deleted them from every corner of my life, and opened my laptop to search for jobs hundreds of miles away. I promised myself one thing: I would build a life so solid, so undeniably mine, that no one could ever again steal from me, neither my dignity nor my dreams. This was the moment my story truly began. Growing up in the small town of Fairview, everything looked perfect from the outside. Our two-story colonial house, the neatly trimmed lawn, the polite smiles when neighbors passed by, people thought we were the model American family. My father, Michael, worked as an administrator at the local hospital, while my mother, Susan, was a nurse. Money was never scarce, and our lives appeared comfortable. But behind that polished facade was a silent hierarchy that shaped every breath of my childhood. When my sister Lauren was born, I was only 4 years old. At first, I didn't notice much had changed, but soon the divide became impossible to ignore. If I needed help with my school project, my mother would tell me to wait because Lauren was fussing. When I tried to show my father a drawing I was proud of, he brushed me off, turning instead to watch Lauren babble her first words. It wasn't just a matter of attention, it was the beginning of a pattern. Lauren was the golden child. I was the shadow. By the time she was in kindergarten, she charmed every adult she met. Her report cards were hung on the refrigerator like trophies. Teachers praised her confidence, and my parents glowed as if every compliment was their personal achievement. My milestones, in contrast, faded into the background. If I scored high marks, the reaction was lukewarm. "That's good, but keep it up." If I showed them a sketch I'd been working on for hours, they frowned and asked why I wasn't outside playing with other kids. "Art won't get you into a good college," my father reminded me again and again, his tone dismissive. The favoritism seeped into every birthday, every holiday, every ordinary day. When I turned 10, I received a hand-me-down bike from a cousin. 3 years later, Lauren got a brand new bike covered in ribbons. When she turned 12, she unwrapped a computer for her bedroom. I was still sharing the family desktop in the living room until I saved babysitting money to buy my own laptop at 16. Christmas mornings told the same story. She always had more boxes to open, more expensive gifts, the exact things she had asked for. Mine were practical and forgettable things that whispered afterthought. I tried everything to balance the scales. I joined clubs I had no passion for, hoping the participation would please them. I volunteered to help around the house without being asked. I studied late into the night, determined to maintain straight A's. Still, it was never enough. Every achievement was overshadowed by Lauren's spotlight. It felt as though no matter how hard I tried, I was destined to be invisible in my own family. Looking back, it wasn't just about presence or attention. It was about the message those small actions carried year after year. Lauren was special, and I was not. And when you are told in 100 subtle ways that you are less deserving, you start to believe it. You start to shrink. I remember staring at myself in the mirror at 13, wondering what was wrong with me. Why couldn't I be like her? Why couldn't I be the child they bragged about at church or work? But here's the truth I've come to realize: children should never have to earn the right to be loved equally. That should be a given. The favoritism wasn't just harmless sibling rivalry, it was emotional neglect, and it left scars that would follow me into adulthood. Before I go deeper, let me pause to ask you, have you ever grown up in a family where someone else always seemed to shine brighter, where your efforts were invisible? If you relate to that feeling, let me know in the comments below. And if you're new here, consider subscribing so you don't miss more stories like this, because what comes next will show just how far I had to go to reclaim my worth. The golden child and scapegoat roles defined our household, and the imbalance only grew sharper with time. And for me, the wound was never just about jealousy. It was about longing for fairness, for validation, for the kind of love that didn't come with conditions. Little did I know, this imbalance would someday erupt into one unforgettable night that would sever everything I thought tied me to my family. The only person who ever truly saw me was my grandmother Evelyn. She lived about 20 minutes away in a modest brick house with a sprawling backyard garden. To the rest of the family, visiting her was just another obligation. To me, those Sunday afternoons at her home were a sanctuary. Grandma Evelyn had been an art teacher before she retired, and she understood my obsession with drawing in a way no one else did. Her dining room had been transformed into a makeshift studio, jars of brushes lined neatly on a shelf, canvases propped against the walls, and a long table forever dusted with bits of charcoal. She'd hand me sketchbooks and say, "Your gift deserves room to breathe, Daniel. Don't ever let anyone convince you otherwise." I can still see her in my memory, sunlight pouring through lace curtains, the faint strains of classical music playing on an old radio, while the smell of her cinnamon cookies filled the air. I would sit at the table sketching, and she would watch with quiet pride, sometimes picking up a brush herself to paint beside me. Those hours were the only time I felt celebrated, rather than compared. When I was in 9th grade, she gave me my first professional set of drawing pencils for Christmas. She leaned close as I unwrapped them and whispered, "Tools for an artist, not for a hobbyist." She said it while my parents were distracted by Lauren showing off some award. That moment planted a seed in me, a belief that maybe my passion wasn't just a childish distraction, but something that could matter. Her support was more than just gifts. She listened when I confided that I felt invisible at home. She never dismissed me or told me to toughen up. Instead, she would say, "Love isn't supposed to be earned like a medal. It's supposed to be given freely." Her words echoed in my mind, long after I left her house each week. But life has a cruel way of testing the foundations we cling to. When I was 17, Grandma Evelyn was diagnosed with cancer. The decline was swift and merciless. I remember standing by her casket at the funeral while my parents hovered around Lauren, fussing about how she was coping. Nobody asked how I was handling the loss. No one noticed the way I clutched the worn set of pencils she had given me, as though holding them tight might keep her alive in some small way. In her will, she left me all of her art supplies and a savings bond that would mature when I turned 21. The note attached was simple: "Use this to chase your dreams, not someone else's expectations." That note became my lifeline. It reminded me that at least one person had believed in me completely. After she passed, the loneliness deepened. Without her, the house in Fairview felt colder, harsher. My parents continued their cycle of favoritism without pause, as though nothing had shifted. But for me, the absence of her voice made everything heavier. There were nights when I almost gave up drawing, altogether thinking maybe my father was right, that it was a waste of time. But every time I picked up one of her brushes, I could almost hear her say, "Keep going, Daniel. Keep creating." That inheritance wasn't just financial, it was symbolic. It was proof that someone valued me, my art, and my future. I promised her that day, standing over her casket, that I would never stop creating. Even if the rest of the world turned away, I would carry her legacy forward. Looking back now, I realize Grandma Evelyn did more than encourage me. She gave me a blueprint for resilience. When you grow up in an environment where you're constantly told you're less, you need at least one voice telling you the opposite. Without her, I might never have found the strength to later walk away. And I want to ask you something here. Have you ever had that one person who believed in you when no one else did? Someone whose words carried you through the darkest times? Share it in the comments below. Because those stories matter. They remind us all that one person's belief can change everything. I didn't know it then, but losing her would set the stage for my biggest realization, that if I wanted to survive, I couldn't keep waiting for my parents to love me the way I deserved. I would have to build that love for myself. High school was supposed to be a fresh start, but for me, it was just another stage where the imbalance became more obvious. I threw myself into academics, determined that if I couldn't win my parents' affection, maybe I could at least earn their respect. I studied until my eyes burned, joined student government, even though public speaking terrified me, and signed up for every club that sounded impressive on a college application. I told myself that if I checked all the right boxes, they would finally look at me the way they looked at Lauren. But no matter what I did, I was invisible in my own house. When I made honor roll every semester, my father barely looked up from his newspaper. "Keep it up," he muttered, then turned to ask Lauren about her soccer team. When I won first place in an art contest, the school displayed my drawing in the main office. Neither of my parents came to the ceremony. They said Lauren had a cold, and that was more important. The contrast was brutal. For Lauren's 10th birthday, they organized a backyard carnival with a rented bounce house and catered food. For mine 3 years earlier, I blew out candles on a store-bought cake at the kitchen table, with only family present. By the time she turned 14, they bought her a car so she could start practicing early. For my 18th birthday, I got a $50 gift card to an office supply store. I remember standing in my bedroom that night, holding that flimsy card in my hand, wondering if it was symbolic. Was this really all I was worth to them, just enough to buy printer ink, and not much more? The anger stung, but beneath it was something worse: resignation. A voice inside me whispered, "Maybe you don't deserve more. Maybe you really are second best." Still, I kept trying. I volunteered to mow the lawn without being asked. I cooked dinner on nights when my mom had late shifts. I carried the weight of being the easy child, the one who didn't complain, didn't demand attention, didn't cause problems. And every time my efforts vanished in the shadow of Lauren's spotlight. The truth is, children shouldn't have to audition for love. They shouldn't have to compete for scraps of recognition in their own homes. But when you grow up in an environment like that, you start to think that constant striving is the only way to survive. I convinced myself that if I could just hit one more milestone, maybe that would be the one that earned me a place in their hearts. The final straw came when I was invited to a small gallery show in Boston during my first year working at a design firm. It was the first time my art had been displayed alongside professionals, and I was terrified but proud. I called my parents, hoping this would be the moment they finally showed up for me. That morning, my mother's voice cracked through the phone. "I'm so sorry, Daniel. Lauren has a mild fever. We can't make it." I stood there, phone pressed against my ear, staring at my reflection in the gallery's bathroom mirror. Around me, other artists had families arriving with flowers, cameras, beaming smiles. I had an empty seat. It hit me then with a clarity I couldn't ignore, no matter how high I climbed. They would never see me. Not the way I wanted. Not the way I needed. That night, instead of despair, I felt something shift. The longing for their recognition, the endless chase for crumbs, it began to loosen its grip. If their approval was impossible to earn, maybe it was time to stop chasing it. Maybe it was time to live for myself. Before I continue, let me ask you something. Have you ever realized that someone's love or approval was never going to come no matter what you did? That moment can break you, or it can free you. Share your story in the comments, because I know I'm not the only one who's felt that sting. I didn't know it yet, but that lesson accepting their blindness was the foundation for the choices I would make years later. Choices that would change my life forever. College was supposed to be liberation. When I packed my bags and left home at 18, I thought I was finally cutting the cord. A new city, a new campus, new people. This was my chance to reinvent myself without the constant comparison to Lauren. I walked into that dorm room believing I could finally breathe. At first it felt true. I poured myself into my classes, majoring in design sketching late into the night while my roommate snored. I worked 2 part-time jobs, one at the campus library, another at a coffee shop to pay for books and living expenses. For the first time, my achievements belonged solely to me. No one could swoop in and diminish them. No one could hand them over to my sister. Or so I thought. Because even in college, my parents' shadow followed me. Calls from home weren't to ask how I was doing, but to tell me how Lauren was thriving. My father boasted about her grades, her internships, the new car they had just upgraded for her. When I mentioned my job promotions or gallery showcases, the conversation drifted quickly back to her accomplishments. I could feel it distance didn't erase invisibility. Still, something inside me hardened in those years. I began to see the pattern clearly. No matter what I did, I would never be the star of their story. And so I decided to write my own. I started freelancing, designing logos for small businesses, building a portfolio that grew faster than I expected. One client turned into 5, then 10. By senior year, I had enough money saved to consider launching my own design firm. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving, I was building. Yet with each success, I found myself aching for the one thing I still hadn't learned to let go of their approval. I invited my parents to my graduation, a moment that should have been monumental. They arrived late, left early, and spent most of their time talking about how Lauren's master's program was more demanding than mine. The hug I got from my father felt like an afterthought. That night, while my friends celebrated with champagne and family photos, I sat alone in my apartment scrolling through their smiling posts. I wanted to feel joy for myself, but the emptiness inside was louder. Why wasn't I enough for them? And then came the breaking point, one phone call that snapped whatever fragile hope I had left. It was my mother's voice again, casual and dismissive. "Daniel, your sister's birthday is coming up, and she really needs a new tablet for her courses. You're doing well now, right? Can you buy it for her?" For a moment I thought I misheard. My hard-earned paycheck, my sleepless nights, my sacrifices. They wanted me to fund the very cycle that had robbed me for years. I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. A cold laugh escaped me, sharp and bitter. That was the moment I finally understood they didn't see me as a son. They saw me as a resource, a convenient safety net for the daughter they had crowned since birth. And I, out of habit, out of longing, had allowed it. But not anymore. I hung up the phone, blocked their numbers once again, and wrote in my journal, "This ends now. My life will no longer orbit theirs. I will be my own gravity." That declaration became my turning point. From then on, every step I took was about carving out an identity that was mine alone. And though the years ahead would test me in ways I couldn't yet imagine, that night marked the death of the boy begging for approval and the birth of the man building his own empire. Before I go further, I want to ask you, have you ever realized your worth was being measured only in what you could give, not in who you were? Drop a comment below. Your stories matter more than you know. The years after college became the crucible that tested everything I had vowed to myself. I moved to a small loft downtown, nothing glamorous, bare brick walls, a mattress on the floor, a desk rescued from a thrift store. But it was mine. Every inch of it was free from their voices, their shadows, their endless comparisons. I threw myself into work. Days blurred into nights as I built my freelance projects into a real design agency. At first, it was just me pitching to clients who barely looked twice at a young man with no backing, no name. But slowly momentum grew. A cafe chain wanted me to redesign their entire brand identity. Then a local nonprofit asked me to create a campaign that went viral. I was surviving, then thriving. Still, the silence in that loft was deafening sometimes. Success filled my wallet, but the hollow ache of family never fully left. There were nights I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was still that boy clutching an unopened birthday gift in the dark. And just when I thought I had escaped the past, came crashing back. It was Thanksgiving. Against my better judgment, I accepted an invitation from my aunt. She said it would be good for family to reconnect. I told myself I was strong enough now, armored by independence. I was wrong. The moment I walked in, I felt the shift. My father's eyes narrowed. My mother's smile was tight, and Lauren, she was radiant in the center of the room, boasting about her new job, her new car, her glittering future. My achievements, though bigger now, were brushed aside as cute projects. Then the dagger. In front of everyone, my father clinked his glass and said, "We're so proud of Lauren. She's carrying the family legacy. Daniel, maybe one day you'll catch up." Laughter rippled across the table, not malicious but careless, like my worth was nothing more than the punchline of a joke. I felt my chest tighten, that old familiar burn, but this time I didn't stay silent. I stood, calm, steady, deliberate. "You don't get to measure me anymore," I said, my voice cutting through the room. Every eye turned to me. "I've built something without you, without your money, without your approval. And for the first time in my life, I don't need you to clap for me." The silence that followed was electric. Lauren shifted uncomfortably. My mother tried to smile it away, but my father's face hardened. Ungrateful, he spat. "Maybe. Or maybe for the first time I was free." I left before dessert was served, walking into the cold night air, heart pounding, but lighter than it had been in years. That was the last family holiday I ever attended. Back in my loft, I poured myself a glass of cheap wine and looked out at the city lights. I realized then that family isn't always the people who share your blood. It's the people who choose to see you, to value you, to stand beside you when the world tries to erase you. And I promised myself that night, under the hum of the city, that I would build my own family one day. A chosen family. One built not on favoritism or cruelty, but on loyalty, love, and presence. For the first time I felt something new, not just anger, not just ambition, but peace. Because the boy they ignored was gone, and the man they tried to dismiss was only just beginning. The weeks after that Thanksgiving were strangely quiet. For the first time, I wasn't haunted by guilt for leaving or fear of what they might say. Instead, I felt clarity. Their voices no longer echoed in my head every time I made a decision. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was liberating. I doubled down on my work. My design agency began picking up bigger clients, not just local businesses, but regional chains. I hired 2 assistants, then 3, and eventually moved into a shared office space with glass walls and buzzing energy. Every small success was mine alone. Proof that my story didn't need their approval to matter. But one evening, as I locked up the office, my phone buzzed. It was a number I hadn't seen in years, Lauren's. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Daniel," she said softly, almost fragile, "I need your help." Her voice caught me off guard. This was the same sister who had smirked when my father belittled me, the same one who smiled while unwrapping the gift I had bought for myself years ago. My instinct was to hang up, but something in her tone stopped me. She explained that the startup she had joined, one my parents had bragged about endlessly, was collapsing. Debt lawsuits, investors pulling out. She was desperate. "I know you're successful now," she said, her voice trembling. "I thought maybe you could guide me." I felt a storm rise inside me. Here she was, the golden child, calling me in her moment of downfall. The irony was almost cruel, but beneath the anger I also heard something else: fear, vulnerability. "Why me?" I asked finally. My voice was flat. "Because," she hesitated, then whispered, "you've always been stronger than me." The words hung in the air like smoke. For years I had been invisible, dismissed, overlooked. And now, in her moment of crisis, she saw me. I didn't give her an answer right away. Instead, I told her to meet me for coffee the next day. When she walked into the cafe, she looked smaller than I remembered. Shoulders hunched, eyes tired, her confidence dimmed. She explained everything: how my parents had pressured her into taking risks, how they had convinced her she couldn't fail, how they kept pouring money into ventures, without structure or strategy. Listening to her, I realized something that startled me. Lauren wasn't just my rival, she was also a victim of their favoritism. They had raised her on a pedestal so high she couldn't see the ground, and now the fall had shattered her. I sipped my coffee thinking. I could have walked away. I could have told her she deserved it, that it was karma, that this was the consequence of years of cruelty. But instead, I leaned forward. "Lauren," I said carefully, "if you want my help, you need to understand something. I won't rescue you. I won't play savior. But I can teach you. and you'll have to do the work yourself. Tears welled in her eyes, but she nodded. I'll do anything. That was the start of something unexpected. For the first time, we weren't siblings trapped in the shadow of our parents. We were two adults trying to build on broken ground. I gave her books to read, podcasts to listen to, spreadsheets to study. I walked her through the mistakes she had made, not with anger, but with clarity. It wasn't easy. There were moments I wanted to quit, moments her old arrogance slipped through. But each time she came back humbled, trying again. Slowly the dynamic shifted. She began to listen, to respect, to see me not as the forgotten brother but as someone worth learning from. One night after another long session of planning, she looked at me and whispered, "I'm sorry for all of it." The words hit me harder than I expected. I didn't forgive her instantly. Scars that deep don't vanish overnight. But for the first time, I felt a weight lift. Helping Lauren didn't erase the past, but it gave me something new, a chance to rewrite the story, not just for me, but for her too. And as strange as it sounds, in teaching her how to rebuild, I realized I was also rebuilding myself. The weeks that followed felt like walking on unfamiliar terrain. Lauren and I met regularly, sometimes in crowded cafes, other times in the quiet corner of my office. She came with notebooks full of scribbles, questions, and half-baked ideas. I came with spreadsheets, frameworks, and the kind of blunt honesty she wasn't used to hearing. There were days she bristled at my tone, her old defensiveness flaring. I'd see the flicker of the sister who once smirked while I was torn apart at the dinner table. But then she'd sigh, lower her shoulders, and ask me to explain again. Humility doesn't come easy to those who've been raised as favorites. Yet I could see her trying, and that mattered. One night as we reviewed her failing startup's numbers, I asked her a question that made her pause. "Why did you even want this company?" She blinked, confused. "Because it was expected. Mom and Dad said I was a natural leader. They said it was my role." Her voice cracked on that word, role. That's when it hit me. She hadn't been chasing passion or vision. She'd been chasing approval, trapped in the same prison I once tried to escape. The difference was, she was handed a crown that weighed too much while I was denied one altogether. "Lauren," I said quietly, "you don't build a business because someone told you to. You build it because it burns inside you, because you can't not build it. Otherwise, it's just an empty show." She stared at me, silent, her eyes glossy. Then she whispered, "All this time I thought I was winning, but maybe I was just playing their game." That admission shifted something between us. For the first time, she wasn't my rival. She was a mirror showing me what could have happened if I had kept begging for their love instead of walking away. From then on, our conversations grew deeper. We spoke less about numbers and more about identity. I asked her what she cared about, what made her restless at night, what she wanted her life to mean when the dust settled. At first, she had no answers. But gradually, she began to sketch glimpses, her love of sustainable fashion. Her dream of designing products that weren't just profitable, but purposeful. The more she opened up, the more I realized she wasn't broken beyond repair. She was simply untrained in authenticity. And then came the moment I least expected. One afternoon, after a long session, she looked at me and said, "You know you'd make a better father than Dad ever was." The words caught in my throat. For years I had wrestled with the shadow of our father's dominance, the way he belittled me, ignored me, weaponized favoritism. And now my own sister, once the embodiment of his approval, was acknowledging the truth I had buried, that strength doesn't come from cruelty, but from resilience. That night I went home and sat in silence. For the first time, I didn't replay old arguments or reimagine confrontations. Instead, I thought about the future. Maybe healing wasn't about confronting my parents, demanding apologies that would never come. Maybe it was about rewriting the script entirely, choosing to create the kind of relationships they were incapable of giving. But I also knew this helping Lauren didn't mean opening the door for them. My parents had made their choice long ago. They had written me out of their story, and I wasn't going to let them back in just because they had failed her too. Lauren and I were building something fragile, yes, but it was ours, not theirs. The irony wasn't lost on me. The family that once discarded me was now leaning, however unintentionally, on the foundation I had built alone. I was no longer the forgotten son. I was the architect of my own legacy, and perhaps the reluctant guide for someone who had once been my enemy. Still, I set boundaries. I told Lauren plainly, "If you want to keep working with me, it stays between us. No parents, no interference. If they ask you, tell them you figured it out yourself." She agreed without hesitation. And in that moment, I realized something powerful. I wasn't just taking back control of my story, I was setting the terms. For years they had dictated the rules. Now I was the one writing them. And it felt damn good. The first test of our fragile alliance came sooner than I expected. Word travels fast in families like ours, especially when failure clings to it. Within a month, my parents called me, not Lauren me. Their tone was unnervingly polite, like they'd forgotten years of silence and betrayal. "We'd love for you to come to dinner," my father said, his voice forced into warmth. I could practically hear the manipulation pulsing through the line. I almost laughed. Years of neglect, gaslighting, and public humiliation erased with a single insincere invitation. They weren't reaching out because they'd changed. They were reaching out because their golden daughter had cracks, and they thought I was the glue. I didn't answer right away. I let the silence linger long enough to make him uncomfortable. Then I said I'll think about it and hung up. When I told Lauren, she went pale. "They know we're working together." "Of course they know," I replied. "They always know. They just never admit what they don't control." She fidgeted with her notebook. "Do you want to go?" The truth was complicated. Part of me wanted to walk into that house, sit at their table, and show them how little power they had left over me. But the other part, the wiser part, knew that kind of showdown wasn't real victory. Victory wasn't proving myself to them. It was never needing to. So I said, "No, I don't want to go. Not on their terms." Her shoulders eased. "Good," she whispered. "Because if you went, I don't think I could keep working with you. It would feel like you were theirs again." That hit me harder than I expected. My sister, the one who once basked in their favoritism, was warning me against falling back under their spell. It was as if we were trading roles in a play neither of us had auditioned for. But I understood, so I set the record straight. I'm not theirs, not anymore. And neither are you if you choose differently. She looked at me, then really looked like she was seeing me for the first time, not as the bitter sibling, but as someone free. And maybe freedom was contagious. Weeks passed, and the work grew more intense. We scrapped her failing model, built leaner prototypes, and aligned her fledgling company around her passion for sustainable fashion. It wasn't glamorous work. It was grueling, unsexy, and full of moments where giving up seemed easier. But here's the thing: she didn't give up. Every time she faltered, I reminded her of the difference between building for applause and building for meaning. And slowly, she stopped chasing echoes of our parents' approval and started listening to her own voice. Then came the launch. It was modest, an online collection of ethically sourced basics marketed through a shoestring budget and raw storytelling. Nothing flashy. Nothing that would make our parents beam with pride at some fancy gala. But it was hers. Authentic. Real. And the response surprised even me. Orders trickled in, then surged. Not millions, not yet, but enough to prove there was life in the idea. Enough to show her that worth wasn't measured in parental nods, but in the genuine resonance of people who believed in her work. The night after the launch, Lauren and I sat on my balcony, the city lights stretching beneath us. She leaned back in her chair, sipping wine, her face softer than I'd ever seen it. "You know," she said, "if they ever find out you're the reason this worked, they'll hate you more than ever." I smirked. "They already hate me. This just gives them a new reason." She laughed, a real unguarded laugh. Then she grew quiet. "But I don't. Not anymore." That confession sat between us, heavy and fragile. For years, my story had been one of exclusion, of clawing my way out of the shadow of my family's cruelty. Now, sitting there with the sister who once embodied everything I despised, I realized something profound. Sometimes revenge doesn't look like burning bridges. Sometimes it looks like building new ones sturdier and on your own terms. But make no mistake, I wasn't naive. I knew this wasn't the end. Our parents would circle back. They always did. And when they did, I'd be ready. This time, though, I wouldn't be defending myself. I'd be defending the boundaries I had carved out of years of fire. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the fight. Success is never quiet in a family addicted to appearances. Within weeks of Lauren's modest launch, whispers reached our parents. I could almost picture their reactions. My mother's brittle smile masking panic. My father's phone, clenched so tight the veins in his hand bulged. Their golden daughter, once untouchable, was now leaning on the very child they had discarded. The first sign came through a cousin. "Your parents are concerned," he said over a hesitant call. "They want to talk. They think maybe there's been a misunderstanding." A misunderstanding. That was their word for decades of favoritism, cruelty, and silence. I didn't even dignify it with a response. Lauren, however, was shaken. She came to my apartment with her eyes rimmed red. They called me, she confessed, voice trembling. They asked me to come home. They said they missed me. They even asked about you. I laughed sharp and bitter. They don't miss you. They miss control. And asking about me. That's not affection. That's surveillance. She flinched. I know, but part of me still wants to believe them. I didn't judge her. How could I? For years I had wanted the same thing. To believe a scrap of kindness meant transformation. But I'd learned the hard way a wolf in silk is still a wolf. So I told her the truth. They're baiting you. If you go back, they'll remind you every second of your place. And if you succeed without them, it will tear at the very illusion they've built. She stared at me for a long time and then whispered, "Then what do we do?" "We build louder," I said. "So loud they can't drown us out." That became our mantra. The following months were a blur of grit and sleepless nights. Lauren's company gained traction. Influencers picked up her brand not because of flashy bribes, but because the message resonated: sustainability, honesty, resilience. Her vulnerability became her strength, and for the first time she wasn't defined by being the chosen daughter. She was defined by being herself. And I became something I never expected: her anchor. Not her savior, not her rival, but the person who reminded her that meaning mattered more than legacy. The tension broke one evening when we were invited to speak at a local entrepreneur panel. Lauren was nervous, pacing backstage, reciting lines like she was about to face an execution. I touched her shoulder and said, "Forget them. Forget the panel even. Just tell the truth. People crave it more than polish." When she finally stepped onto that stage, she shook, but then she spoke. And her words cut sharper than any rehearsed pitch. She spoke about growing up in a family where success was currency, love was conditional, and failure was exile. She didn't name names, but anyone who knew us could read between the lines. The audience leaned in. They weren't hearing a pitch. They were hearing survival dressed as purpose. And when she ended with, "I built this not to impress anyone, but to finally stop apologizing for existing," the applause thundered. Afterward, as cameras flashed and questions swarmed, I stood to the side. For once, I wasn't in the shadows. I wasn't invisible. I was exactly where I wanted to be, untethered, unbothered, and quietly satisfied that the narrative was shifting. That night, though, my phone lit up. A single message from my mother. "You've poisoned her. She was ours. Now she's ruined." I stared at the words, cold, settling in my chest. There it was, the truth they'd never admit out loud. Not love, not pride, ownership. She was theirs. And by extension, so was I once. But not anymore. I didn't reply. Instead, I poured myself a drink, looked out over the city lights, and whispered to the night, "She was never yours. She's finally hers." And in that moment, I realized something profound: revenge didn't always roar. Sometimes it whispered in victories too quiet for the world to notice, but loud enough to dismantle the illusions of those who built their power on lies. The real war hadn't started yet. I could feel it pulsing on the horizon. But for the first time, I wasn't bracing for survival. I was preparing for dominance. The message from my mother might as well have been written in fire. She was ours. Now she's ruined. I read it over and over, until the words etched themselves into my skin, like scars that refused to fade. But instead of pain, I felt clarity. For years I had begged for scraps of recognition. Now, standing on the balcony with the city lights shimmering like a constellation of second chances, I understood they had never wanted daughters. They had wanted assets. And Lauren, the golden child, had finally stopped being profitable. The days that followed were strange. Our parents did not storm into our lives with fury, not at first. They sent emissaries, uncles with oily smiles, aunts with trembling voices, cousins dangling olive branches carved from poison. "They only want to talk," one cousin insisted. "They're worried. They're saying you've changed." I almost laughed. Changed. As if independence was a disease I had caught and spread to Lauren. Lauren wavered. She sat across from me one evening, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles blanched. What if we're wrong? What if they actually want to make peace?" Her voice cracked, and in that fracture I heard the echoes of my own childhood. Those nights I prayed for love to materialize from absence, for warmth to bloom in a house of ice. I leaned forward. Peace to them means surrender. It means crawling back and apologizing for daring to exist on your own terms. Do you really want to return to that cage? Tears welled in her eyes, but she shook her head. Quietly she whispered, "No." And that was the last time she questioned it. We threw ourselves into the work. If revenge was a fire, then purpose was the oxygen. Lauren's company became more than a business, it became a statement. Every product she sold was a rebellion. Every story she told an indictment of the family that had tried to bury us. The press noticed. Articles surfaced. Sisters redefining success. Outside legacy ties. Photographs of Lauren with me at her side began to circulate. In those pictures, I did not look invisible anymore. I looked whole. Of course, visibility drew enemies. Our parents grew louder in their private circles. We heard whispers of them labeling us ungrateful, dangerous, even deranged. It didn't matter. The louder they shouted, the clearer their desperation became. Then came the dinner invitation. A cream-colored envelope slid under Lauren's office door one morning. Embossed in gold, elegant as ever, the handwriting was unmistakable. Family dinner, Sunday, attendance expected. No signatures, just expectation heavy and suffocating. Lauren froze when she read it. "They'll never stop, will they?" she murmured. I took the invitation, ripped it clean in half, and dropped the pieces into the trash. "No," I said, "but neither will we." The night of the so-called dinner, we staged our own gathering. Lauren rented a small loft downtown and invited her employees, her supporters, her growing circle of allies. There was laughter, cheap wine, and mismatched plates stacked high with food. No chandeliers, no hushed judgments, just people who wanted to be there. At one point, Lauren stood and raised a glass. Her voice was steady now, her eyes alight. "I used to think family was something you owed," she said, "but tonight I know it's something you choose." The room erupted in cheers, and for a fleeting moment I felt the weight of every abandonment lift. But shadows lingered. Later that week, I received another message. Not a plea this time, not even an accusation. It was a warning. "If you keep this up, you'll regret it." No signature, but none was needed. The venom in those words could only come from one place. I stared at the message until my phone screen dimmed. Fear should have clawed at me. Instead, a strange calm settled in. Because if they were threatening us, it meant they finally understood we were no longer beneath them. We were standing against them. And for the first time in my life, I didn't just want to survive their wrath. I wanted to dismantle it. I closed my eyes, inhaled deeply, and whispered to the silence, "Let them come. We're ready now." Because the real story wasn't about running anymore. It was about fighting. And this time they'd learned that the daughters they dismissed were the ones destined to unravel their empire. Thread by thread, lie by lie, until nothing of their illusion remained. The warning message glowed on my phone screen like a brand on my skin. "If you keep this up, you'll regret it." For a long moment, I sat in silence, the hum of the city beyond my window, muted by the weight of those words. Once, I would have been terrified. Once, I would have curled inward, praying they'd forget about me if I stayed quiet enough. But not anymore. Instead, I screenshotted the message and sent it to Lauren. Within minutes, she stormed into my apartment, eyes blazing. "They threatened you," she demanded, pacing like a storm trapped in human form. I nodded calm in a way that startled even me. "Yes, which means we've hit a nerve. They're scared." Lauren's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Then we're closer than I thought." That night we sat together at the kitchen table, the same place we had once shared, whispered dreams, as children plotting escapes we thought would never come. Now, instead of escape, we plotted resistance. Lauren drafted new legal protections for her company, trusts, contracts, shields no smear campaign could penetrate. I reached out to journalists, the few brave enough to dig into the stories of families like ours, where legacy was built on exploitation and silence. We no longer whispered, we shouted. The response was staggering. Our story, 2 daughters cast out for refusing to play the roles written for them, resonated. Letters poured in. Women who had been erased by their fathers, men disowned for refusing to inherit corrupted empires, children raised to be pawns who had clawed their way to freedom. They saw themselves in us. One night, after reading a particularly gut-wrenching letter from a girl in Texas who had been cut off for rejecting an arranged marriage, Lauren whispered, "We can't just survive this. We have to turn it into something bigger." That was the birth of our movement. We called it the Chosen Kin Project. Its mission was simple but radical, to give voice and support to those who had been cast aside by blood, to remind them they were not alone, and to build families from choice rather than coercion. Our first event was small, 30 people crammed into a rented hall, folding chairs wobbling on uneven floors. But when each person stood to share their story, the air grew electric. Tears fell freely, laughter broke through the heaviness, and for the first time in years, I felt something bloom inside me that had long been buried hope. Word spread. Within months, 30 turned to 300. Communities formed, bonds forged stronger than anything our parents had ever offered us. It was messy, imperfect, beautiful, and it was ours. Of course, our parents noticed. They tried to undermine us, leaking half-truths to the press, painting us as unstable, manipulative, even dangerous. But every attack only fueled the fire. People had seen our faces, they had heard our voices, and they knew authenticity when they felt it. The final straw came when one of their allies, a prominent investor, attempted to shut down Lauren's company with a fraudulent lawsuit. They thought it would scare us into submission. Instead, it gave us the platform we hadn't known we needed. Lauren stood in court, elegant and unflinching, while I sat in the gallery recording every word. She dismantled the accusations with receipts, contracts, and a calm ferocity that left the opposing lawyer stammering. When the judge dismissed the case and rebuked the plaintiff, the gallery erupted in applause. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Microphones pressed against us like weapons, but for once I didn't feel cornered. I leaned into one and said clearly, "For years they told us family was blood, but tonight I tell you this family is loyalty, honesty, and choice. Blood without love is nothing but biology." The clip went viral overnight. Millions watched. Some sneered, most cheered. And suddenly we were no longer just survivors of a toxic legacy, we were leaders of a movement. But the victory was not without shadows. Our parents retreated not defeated, but simmering, planning their next strike in the dark. I could feel it in the silence, the way predators crouch before lunging. Lauren asked me one night as we sat overlooking the city lights from her office, "Do you ever think this will end?" I thought of the message, the threats, the endless cycle of control they tried to impose. Then I looked at her stronger than I had ever seen her, radiant with defiance. "No," I admitted, "but maybe that's not the point. Maybe the point isn't to end them. Maybe it's to outgrow them so completely they can't touch us anymore." She nodded slowly, a spark in her eyes. "Then let's keep growing." And in that moment, I realized something profound. The war we were fighting wasn't just against our parents. It was against the very idea that our worth could ever be dictated by anyone but ourselves. The next chapter was unwritten, but for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the unknown. I was ready to walk into it, head high, shoulders squared, with a chosen family at my side. Because the real regret I knew now wouldn't be theirs. It would have been ours if we had stayed silent. The first real test of the Chosen Kin project came faster than we imagined. Our second national gathering was set in Chicago, a city that had always represented both opportunity and risk. The venue was larger, an old converted theater with creaking floorboards and velvet curtains that smelled faintly of dust and history. We had sold nearly 1,000 tickets, and journalists were already circling, eager to frame us, either as visionaries or as rebels without cause. Lauren stood backstage in her tailored suit, her voice steady as she rehearsed her opening remarks. I paced in the shadows, nerves crawling under my skin. Every time the spotlight shifted, I half expected one of our parents' allies to emerge, ready to sabotage the event. The threats hadn't stopped. Anonymous emails, veiled warnings, subtle whispers about unfinished business. Yet the more they tried to silence us, the louder our voices became. When the curtains rose, the sight nearly broke me. 1,000 people, faces of every age, every color, every story stood shoulder to shoulder, clapping as if they had been waiting their entire lives for this moment. Lauren began to speak, her words weaving like a spell. She told the truth about power, about choice, about the freedom that comes not from inheritance, but from integrity. The room vibrated with recognition. Then it was my turn. I stepped to the podium, the weight of every betrayal pressing against my chest. But when I looked out into the crowd, I saw not strangers, but mirrors. People who had been denied, abandoned, erased, yet who stood tall anyway. My voice, once shaky, rang clear. I told them what my father had said at that cursed dinner table, that I was no longer family. And I told them how wrong he was. Blood does not bind us, I declared. Love does, loyalty does, choice does, and tonight we prove it. The applause was deafening, but it wasn't just noise, it was thunder, the kind that cracks open skies. In the days that followed, the media storm erupted. Headlines split in two, some called us radical daughters, others the architects of a new legacy. Our parents predictably issued statements dripping with condescension. We wish them well, but regret their misguided choices. It was the same old narrative, the same attempt to paint us as lost children, rather than leaders of a movement. But the tide was shifting. One particular interview changed everything. A respected anchor, known for her sharp questions, invited me on her primetime show. She leaned in with that familiar smirk, waiting to corner me. "Don't you think," she asked, "that you're just running from your bloodline instead of honoring it?" I smiled, not out of politeness, but out of clarity. With respect, I said, "You don't honor a bloodline built on silencing and control. You honor truth, and truth is, family is earned. If blood refuses to love you, then it's not family at all." The clip spread like wildfire. Overnight, the phrase "family is earned" appeared on signs, shirts, even graffiti across cities. We hadn't just sparked a project, we'd sparked a revolution of belonging. Yet revolutions draw enemies. Weeks later, as Lauren and I walked out of her office one night, headlights cut across the parking lot, too bright, too sudden. A car screeched to a halt inches from us. The window rolled down and a voice hissed, "Stop this or it won't just be lawsuits next time." Then the car vanished into the night, leaving tire marks burned into the pavement. For the first time in months, fear clawed its way back into me. My hands shook as I unlocked my door. Lauren pressed her palm against mine. "They're desperate," she whispered. "Desperate people make noise before they fall." I wanted to believe her. Still, that night sleep didn't come. I sat at my desk, staring at the glowing cursor on my screen. And then I began to write, not about fear, but about defiance. About the thousands who had trusted us with their stories. About how silence had once been my prison, but now my weapon was voice. The essay went live at dawn. We are not afraid. It was raw, vulnerable, angry, but it was mine. Within hours, it was everywhere. People shared it, quoted it, translated it into languages I couldn't even recognize. And with every share, I felt less alone. Lauren found me later that day, tears in her eyes, phone buzzing with messages of support. "Do you realize what you've done?" she asked softly. I shook my head. "You turned their threat into our anthem." It hit me then, this wasn't just survival anymore. This was transformation. Every attempt to break us had become a stepping stone, every attack an opportunity to grow louder. Our parents had wanted obedient daughters. Instead, they had created leaders. And as I stood by the window that night, watching the city lights flicker like stars fall into earth, I whispered to myself a vow. They may own the past, but we will own the future. The night after my essay went viral, the city felt different. I walked through downtown streets, neon lights reflecting on the slick pavement, and strangers whispered, "That's her," not with pity, but with recognition. Some smiled, others placed a hand over their hearts, and a few even stopped to thank me. It was surreal how a sentence, written in a haze of anger and exhaustion, had become a banner people carried into their own battles. But victories always summon shadows. A week later, I received a call from an unknown number. At first, I ignored it, but it rang again and again until I answered. Silence. Then a low voice. "You think you've won, but blood doesn't forget." The line went dead before I could respond. Lauren urged me to report it. We filed the incident, but deep down I knew the police wouldn't be our shield. The real danger wasn't in the threats, it was in how far our parents and their allies were willing to go to reclaim control. It didn't take long to find out. At our next regional gathering, I noticed her, my mother. She had never attended anything I cared about before, never applauded a performance, never encouraged a dream. And yet, there she was sitting quietly in the back row, pearls glinting beneath the dim lights, her expression unreadable. My pulse hammered in my throat. For a moment I thought she had come to reconcile. A ridiculous hope, but hope nonetheless. When the event ended, she approached me, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. Lauren stood at my side, wary but silent. My mother's smile was brittle, the kind that fractures at the edges. "You've made your point," she said, her voice smooth as glass. "But it's time to come home." Home. The word felt poisonous. I asked her why, after months of disowning me, dismissing me, condemning me, she would suddenly want me back. Her answer chilled me. "Because without you, our legacy looks incomplete. You belong to us, whether you like it or not." It wasn't an invitation, it was a claim. I refused firmly, but she only leaned closer, lowering her voice so only I could hear. "Keep this circus alive, and we'll burn every bridge you've built. Sponsors, allies, even those little friends who think you're their savior, we'll strip them from you one by one." The room spun. This wasn't just about me anymore. They wanted to crush everyone who had chosen to stand beside me. For hours afterward, I sat in silence, replaying her words, my heart heavy with the weight of choice. Was I endangering the very people who had lifted me up? Could defiance be worth the cost if others paid the price? Lauren found me later that night, curled on the balcony, staring at the city's restless skyline. I confessed everything. She didn't hesitate. "Listen to me," she said, gripping my shoulders. "They only win if you believe their lies. You think you're putting others in danger, but in truth, you've already given them strength. Do you know how many people told me your essay saved them, that it kept them from giving up? You're not endangering them, you're leading them." Her words anchored me. For so long I had internalized their narrative that I was selfish, ungrateful, reckless. But Lauren was right. This wasn't about running from blood anymore. This was about building a future where no one had to beg for belonging. The next day I turned my mother's threat into fuel. On stage in front of another gathering, I told the crowd exactly what she had said. I didn't shield her power. I stripped it bare. They told me I would always belong to them, I said, my voice carrying through the packed hall. But the truth is, I belong to those who choose me and to those I choose in return. That's family, not coercion, not fear, choice. The hall erupted. People stood clapping, stomping, some with tears streaming down their faces. For the first time, I felt not like a victim breaking chains, but like a leader forging new ones. That night, messages flooded in from around the world. Stories of disowned children, abandoned partners, betrayed friends, all of them echoing the same sentiment. If family is earned, then I am not alone. And for the first time, neither was I. Still as I closed my eyes, exhaustion pulling me under, one truth remained clear. The fight wasn't over. My parents had played their hand openly now. And the next strike, I feared, wouldn't come in whispers or veiled threats. It would come in fire. The attack didn't come as whispers this time, it came as spectacle. 2 weeks later, our city hosted the annual gala for emerging leaders, an event where I had been invited to speak about resilience. I arrived in a simple black dress, Lauren by my side, nerves fluttering in my stomach, but pride grounding my steps. I had worked for this moment, not for validation, but to prove that scars could become symbols. The ballroom shimmered with chandeliers and murmurs of admiration. Cameras flashed. Strangers shook my hand. For a while, it felt like my life had finally settled into balance, until the lights dimmed. The MC introduced me, and as I stepped onto the stage, the screen behind me lit up, not with my prepared slides, but with a grainy video, my childhood photos, my teenage mistakes, a carefully spliced narrative framing me as a manipulative daughter who had smeared her loving family for fame. The room gasped. My chest tightened. On the screen, my mother's voice echoed. She was always ungrateful, always cruel. We gave her everything, and this is how she repays us. It was a public execution disguised as concern. For a heartbeat, I froze. Shame clawed at me, threatening to drag me back into silence. My hands trembled. The audience stared, waiting for me to break. But then I saw Lauren in the crowd, arms crossed, eyes locked on me, a small nod that said, "Stand. Don't give them what they want." So I did. I stepped forward away from the screen and let the microphone carry my voice. Yes, I began surprising even myself with the steadiness of my tone. That is my family, and those are their words. But let me tell you what those pictures don't show. They don't show the nights I cried myself to sleep because approval was conditional. They don't show the bruises of silence, the way neglect cuts deeper than any blade. They don't show the truth that blood alone is not enough to call something love. A hush fell. I leaned closer to the crowd. If my story scares them enough to weaponize my past, then maybe it's because they know my truth has power. And here's the part they cannot erase. I am not theirs to control anymore. I belong to the people who stand beside me, not the ones who tried to bury me. Applause erupted, hesitant at first, then rolling like thunder. The video flickered off. My mother had tried to claim the stage, but I had claimed the narrative. Afterward, people swarmed me not with pity, but with solidarity. Survivors of toxic families whispered their gratitude. Leaders pledged support. Journalists asked for interviews not about the smear campaign, but about the movement of chosen kinship that was growing louder by the day. Backstage, Lauren squeezed my hand, her eyes shining. "They thought they could shame you," she said, "but you turned it into a rallying cry." I laughed through tears, the weight in my chest finally lifting. "They'll never stop trying, will they?" "No," she admitted, "but neither will we." That night, the hashtag #SarkFamilyByChoice began trending worldwide. Thousands shared their own stories, declaring freedom from coercion, celebrating bonds built on love instead of fear. My parents had tried to destroy me with exposure, but instead, they had lit a fire they couldn't extinguish. Still as the glow of victory warmed me, a chill lingered at the edges. because deep down, I knew my family wasn't done. The next move wouldn't just be words or videos, it would be something tangible, something designed to break more than my reputation. And when it came, I had to be ready. But for now, for one night, I allowed myself to breathe, to celebrate, to believe. Because against all odds, I had stood tall under their shadow and found light of my own. And this was only the beginning. I always knew the final blow wouldn't be subtle. My family thrived on spectacle, on forcing me into corners where silence was their victory. But I had stopped being silent long ago. It came on an ordinary Tuesday morning. A thick envelope slid under my apartment door, stamped with a family crest I hadn't seen in years. Inside was a legal summons. My parents were suing me for defamation, demanding public retraction of everything I had ever spoken about them. The cost of resistance, my career, my platform, my voice. For a moment, fear twisted in my stomach. Courtrooms were their kingdom, grand performances where truth was buried under theatrics. But I wasn't that scared little girl anymore. I had allies, evidence, and most importantly, I had choice. I walked into that courtroom with Lauren beside me and a gallery filled with people who had lived stories like mine. Survivors, advocates, chosen family. The judge listened as their lawyers painted me as a bitter liar. Then it was my turn. I didn't just tell my story, I showed it. Years of journals, records, witnesses who had seen the bruises no camera ever caught. And finally, the countless voices who had written to me since I spoke out, letters from strangers who found courage in my words. By the time I finished, the courtroom wasn't just silent. It was alive with something else: recognition. The verdict came swift and clear: case dismissed. Their attempt to silence me had failed again. Outside cameras flashed, microphones shoved forward. "What do you want to say to your parents now that you've won?" a reporter asked. I took a breath, feeling the weight of years lifting from my shoulders. Family is not defined by fear, I said. Family is not defined by control. Family is chosen every day through love, respect, and presence. And I have chosen mine. Behind me, Lauren squeezed my hand. I looked around at the faces of the people who had stood by me when my own bloodline tried to erase me. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a daughter abandoned. I felt like a woman who had built something stronger, something unshakable. In the weeks that followed, the movement grew. Family by Choice wasn't just a hashtag anymore. It became a network, a foundation, a lifeline for people worldwide who needed to hear that leaving didn't mean losing, that surviving didn't mean shame. As for my parents, they retreated into silence, maybe from shame, maybe from exhaustion. But their power over me was gone. Their shadow no longer reached my doorstep. And me, I kept speaking, kept living, kept choosing. Because in the end, survival wasn't the victory. Thriving was. And for the first time, I could finally say I was free.